actually to local Mayor Sandra Hazards for coming along today. I've got Nadine Tunley, CEO of 14Z, Cameron Taylor from Taylor Court, and of course local MP Anna Hawke here with me today. Cyclone Gabrielle, along with hail and the Auckland floods, but in particular Gabrielle, it's the biggest weather event that this country's ever experienced. And never before have we had a weather event that has gone across so many regions, from the top of Northland, across to the East Cape, down here on the East Coast, all the way down to the southern coast of Wairarapa. But in particular here in Hawke's Bay and Tairāwhiti, we know that land-based businesses have been severely impacted. There's been over $1 billion invested from central government into affected areas, but one thing has been clear, is that it's our land-based businesses in particular that have been hit hard. Unlike previous events where government support could be applied universally across businesses, the complex nature of Cyclone Gabrielle has meant that different sectors have been hit in different ways, and even businesses within the same sector have been hit differently. So if you drive down the road, you talk to one orchardist, they're affected in one way, go a couple of orchards down the road, they're affected in a different way. So to try and develop a support package across those diverse needs has been a very difficult task, and I want to acknowledge in particular the horticulture industry for working closely with government and helping us to develop a support package. So there's a few things that we're announcing today. First and foremost, there is a loan guarantee scheme announced today in conjunction with banks, up to $10 million over 5 years, a guarantee of 80% by the government. What this means is that lenders will have more confidence to borrow, to lend, but also in more favourable terms. So even a marginal decrease of interest could mean the difference of tens of thousands, or even, depending on the circumstances, hundreds of thousands of dollars of savings as a result of that. So we know that this will basically mean that people that wouldn't otherwise be able to get the lending that they need, they'll be able to do that now. In addition to that, we're announcing a concessionary loan scheme. We're encouraging people to go to their banks in the first instance, but if that doesn't work out, the government will offer concessionary loans with deferred interest over 10 years, up to $4 million, with the possibility of going higher depending on circumstances. So what that means is, in particular, smaller operators, family-run businesses that have had their trees wiped out, that will take years for them to grow and start producing fruit, that they will be able to access a loan without having to pay interest until they become productive again. The additional element to this is an equity scheme, and this is offering up to 25% stake of a business that over 5 years can eventually be wound back and they can have a full ownership of their business again. The reason we've done this is to try and account for the various circumstances that have affected land-based businesses. The first part that I announced, that is available to all businesses that meet the criteria in all affected areas. The concessionary loan and the equity scheme, that's available to land-based businesses only. We really wanted to provide that support to horticulture and agriculture in particular. And so over the last wee while, and coming here to Hawke's Bay, but also in my own patch in Wairarapa and Tararua, I've spoken to a number of people that have been affected. I'm thinking of the arable farmer that just wanted support so that they could keep their staff so that until they start growing again next year. This will help them. I'm thinking of a rural support business who's racked up a lot of debt, helping those affected by getting generators and other things, but those that they've helped aren't in a position to pay yet. This will help them. And also here, obviously, in Hawke's Bay, with horticulture at the front of our mind, those that have been impacted by silt and other impacts on their trees, but are able to grow again next year, and also those that have lost their trees completely, and it's going to take a wee while for that support to come through. So that's what we're announcing today in terms of support. I also want to touch on another announcement before I ask the others to speak, and that is around a government inquiry into the response. This should come as no surprise to anybody. We've indicated that the government will be doing an inquiry into the response to the severe weather here in the North Island, but now we have the details to announce. It is common practice for a review to happen regardless of the size of the event, local civil defence and NEMA often look at a response and try and incorporate the lessons to improve it for the next one. Just this morning, the first reading of the Emergency Management Bill is underway. That is the result of 10 years of these reviews and taking into account the lessons. What we do know, though, is that there will be lessons that come out of Gabrielle in particular that haven't been captured by this bill. So the government inquiry, which will be chaired by former Governor-General Sir Jerry Mataparai, will take this into account. The other 3 panel members will be announced shortly. Due diligence is just underway at the moment, but we have locked in Sir Jerry and he's ready to go. And so that'll be starting in July. It'll be reporting back in March, and it's my hope that the select committee that will be considering the Emergency Management Bill will extend out the period where they consider submissions, so that when the inquiry reports back, if there are lessons that we can put into the bill, we can do so at that point, so that we can pass the legislation and be as best prepared as possible for the next severe event. I'd like to invite Nadine to come forward and say a few things.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Kieran. So yes, Horticulture New Zealand is pleased to see that the announcement being made today. It will enable our growers to actually make some decisions now and move on. I think it's been hard for everybody, but there's been a lot of work put in from both sector as well as government, so we appreciate that as well. They are a little bit complicated, the instruments, so they will need to speak to their banks first and work through how that will actually work for them. But again, today's been a long time coming for very many growers, and we're pleased to have that concluded finally. So thank you. Cameron, if you'd like to say something.
Yeah, it is complicated, so it's going to take a bit to digest and talk to our banks and all that. If it's good or bad, we just need certainty. So basically, is this it? You know, that's our big thing. You know, we don't want to be living in hope. We've got to make harsh decisions, and it might be bad or good, but we need to say this is it, so we can move forward. So that's our big thing. So yeah, so we've got some time to digest this and talk to the banks, and hopefully we can move forward. So yeah, that's where we stand. So.
Thank you. Happy to take questions.
Minister, in regards to the inquiry, what do you say to the people that didn't get alerts that the flooding was coming? People, in Escalade that I've talked to that were rescued off roofs, that say that civil defence really failed them.
Well, at the end of the day, it's always been a case that civil defence is run locally. Gabrielle was only the 3rd time that we've had a state of national emergency declared, but even then it was still locally run and government supported. Why we want to do an inquiry is we've always got to be open for improvements. And the key thing here for me is that I think there's some obvious things that didn't quite go right. There's some obvious things that we can improve on, but lessons don't always come from mistakes either. And what I really like about the civil defence structure in New Zealand and NEMA's attitude is that they're always open for improvements. And so we could have left things to the usual process of leaving it down to a local inquiry and review and feeding that back up the chain, but we weren't comfortable with that. It might be the 3rd time we've had a national declaration, but it's only the 1st time we've had one for a weather event. That warrants a government inquiry in my view, and I think having Sir Jerry Mataparai as the chair should give everyone confidence that we're taking this very seriously.
That night, as Hawke's Bay flooded, people were left to fend for themselves. Is that good enough?
I think the nature of the event being an unprecedented event, given how far-reaching it was, there is always going to be circumstances where people can't get assistance immediately. But given that we've just announced an inquiry, I think I'm going to wait to see what they have to say about that. But I will reassure people that we are, as a government, up for any recommendation that will look to improve our civil defence structure. What I like about civil defence and emergency management is that it's one of the very few things that people don't play politics on. I've engaged with other parties in the development of the bill, and that's, as I said, being read for the first time today. I wanted to be here. This was more important. I'll speak to the bill at another date. But I engaged with other parties and took on board their feedback and incorporated it into the bill. It's too important to play politics. So
with regard to the package, why didn't you give any hard, cold cash? You're giving loans and equity, and are Nadine and Cam happy with what they're getting?
Well, the thing is that we've got to remember is that this package was developed alongside the industry, is that we were talking to them about what they wanted, and being able to have a range of 3 options that is going to assist businesses, I think is landing things about right. Is that we're able to give people confidence, or give the banks confidence to lend where they might not have been able to lend, because the government's stepping in to guarantee those loans. And even if they aren't in a position to do that, the government will give a loan that has interest deferred for 10 years. What this says is that we understand how Hawke in particular works, that those that need to replace their trees, it's going to take a long time for the fruit to start returning a profit. We don't want people to have to worry about interest in the meantime. And also, particularly for the smaller family-run ones, they might not want to take on more debt, but are interested in the equity approach that the government is offering as well. So by working with the industry, we've been able to land in a place that is, I think, going to be effective. It's going to provide support, but to Cam's point earlier, it's going to provide that reassurance. This is the support package. People will be able to make investment decisions for their business based on this. And when we see, like here at Taylor Court, where there's significant investment, they're investing in the region, they're investing in the industry. It's not just regionally significant, it's actually nationally significant. The ag sector and hort sector are far too important to leave to their own chances. We wanted to back them, and this is the best way to do it.
So why didn't you give them
money?
money?
Why has it taken so long? Growers have begged for this for around 5 months now, so why has it taken this long? You yourself just said it was so important.
Yeah, it is. It's incredibly important, but it's equally important to get it right. I outlined briefly the number of diverse businesses that I've spoken to, not just as local MP, but as the Minister responsible for the recovery here. Everyone's circumstances are different. If, for example, we took an approach like we did with COVID and said, right, there's a wage subsidy available for everyone, that might help your arable growers, but it's not going to help hort. So we needed to develop a package that is actually going to be across the board and provide support to everyone, land-based, but also the first part of the package is for every business that's been affected.
And what reassurance can you give growers around the process? There's been huge struggles with people actually accessing any of this money previously. What reassurance can you give that this process will be a lot smoother?
Yeah, I can absolutely assure them that this needs to get out as quick as possible, and we know that. The first port of call, though, is to talk to the banks, because this should give banks confidence to lend where they may not have otherwise done so, or even if they were willing to lend before, it'll give them a situation where they can offer better terms, and that's going to help them. If they then can't get anywhere with the banks, come and talk to Kanoa. They can register their interest in the concessionary loan or the equity scheme straight away, and Kanoa will work them through their process once they've talked to the banks.
And what do you, can I just move back to the inquiry now, what do you say back to comments like Hawke's Bay Civil Defence was set up to fail?
I want to wait and see what the inquiry comes back with. As Emergency Management Minister, I take this incredibly seriously, but ultimately it's about how well resourced are local civil defence, given that they are they hold the primary responsibility for their response. If they weren't, what are the barriers to it? What can the government do to assist them? You know, I'm not going to jump to conclusions. I've been here regularly for a long time now. I've seen a lot. I've spoken to a lot of people. I've heard their concerns, but it's actually those concerns that have in part led to us to announce the inquiry. I think it should reassure everybody, whether they're happy with the response or not, that we're taking this very seriously, and we're going to take whatever recommendations come seriously as well.
And what were some of the concerns that or problems that you did see happen throughout the process? And you said just before earlier that there were clearly some problems that happened. What sort of things are you talking about there?
Well, I'm conscious that I'm in Hawke's Bay, but by answering this question I want to make it clear that I'm speaking generally, because I don't think it's helpful to be signalling any region out when there were so many that were affected. But communications are vitally important in a natural disaster, in a severe weather event, and I'm talking across hail, Auckland floods and Gabrielle. The ability to communicate can be the difference between life and death. But also, if the communications and the powers are taken out, what are the backup plans? So I think things like that is what the inquiry are going to be looking into, and that's why we're putting a lot of weight on this, because we have this opportunity with the Emergency Management Bill going through Parliament to whatever recommendations come out, we can very quickly make those changes. And that's actually a good opportunity. It doesn't always happen like that. Normally you'd have an inquiry or a review then you have to go away and look at it, you then have to introduce a bill, could be 18 months away, but that process has started, and if we time the report back with the select committee process right, these reviews will be law very quickly.
Are you
So did you
confident in how
mention
those
the-
communications unfolded?
I really don't want to be drawn into what I think worked well and what didn't, because that's only my perspective. You know, the point of a review and an inquiry is that they will hear from people that have got concerns, they will talk to experts in emergency management, they will compare it to what's in the bill, to previous events, and have the full context. I'm not sure it's helpful for the responsible minister to be announcing an inquiry and then throwing out his reckons at the same time.
And with the growers and the farmers and those land-based kind of businesses that were impacted, is there any more money coming, or is this it?
I think this will actually address many of the needs that people have addressed. The thing is that we can't help everyone, and if the business is not to a point where it's viable, then unfortunately, then this won't assist them. But I think the numbers that fall into that category will be very small. The vast majority of businesses, I think, land-based businesses, ag and hort and otherwise, will find this reassuring today, because if they have already spoken to their bank, and the bank's already helped them, they're ready to go. But if they've already spoken to their bank and their bank says, we're not sure, today should give them confidence to do that. But if that still doesn't work, then the government's going to come in with those interest-deferred loans to give them that reassurance. I think this will go down well.
In
Do you
terms
have a
of
total
future
dollar
flooding
value
events,
per
obviously
package?
this isn't probably going to be the last one that this region or that New Zealand has. Can you make any assurances to growers that there is going to be some kind of plan from government to help them to mitigate those risks and make sure they can get back on their feet and that it won't take 5 months next time?
The whole way we have approached this is with the next event and the one after that in mind. And I've been as frustrated as anybody about how long it's been taking. But in some ways, you're sort of building the plane as you fly it, because it is an unprecedented event. And because we know there's going to be more, we've got to treat this one like we're going to treat the next one. And so to the previous question, why wasn't there just cash buyouts? Why isn't the government just buying out all houses in Category 3? We'd bankrupt the government, because these events are going to be more severe and more frequent. How we treat this one must determine how we go about the next one. And so I think we're setting a blueprint for our approach. It's not going to be in isolation though. The climate adaptation plan is still going. We want to get our civil defence structures and responses right, and we also want to make sure that ongoing partnerships between local government and central government are right. There's a lot that needs to happen as well as respond to this event itself.
And is the government thinking about future events when it thinks about, food security and how to ease these growers' fears that when they put their crops back in the ground, there will be some surety in the future if they get wiped out again?
Well, I can assure you, in this role as Emergency Management Minister, that's pretty much all I think about. This is massive, and it's something we all need to get our heads around. I went up to Gisborne last weekend, which turned out to be a relatively small event. Most of the rain went off out to sea, but that relatively small amount of rain closed State Highway 2. It ruined local roads. It ruined homes that weren't even affected by Gabrielle. These things are ongoing and they'll keep going, and so this is a massive focus of mine.
So the bankrupting the government bit, is that why the 750 million is not forthcoming that growers asked for? I mean, it's pretty reputable people. Some of whom are here costed that. They were pretty explicit about what they wanted. This isn't like that at all, is it?
Well, I've got confidence, given how involved the hort sector was in the development of this package, is that this is going to help the vast majority of land-based businesses and other businesses that have been affected.
So did they tell you that this was a preferred option over cash?
There were 6 options in the discussions that the government put forward, and these 3 in particular were highlighted as, in the first instance, as something that we should work on further, and we've continued to work alongside them. It's mainly been Minister O'Connor and Minister Robertson, but obviously I've been briefed as from Wairarapa, Tararua and Hawke's Bay perspective, but also emergency management, and so we're confident, given the feedback that we've got from the sector, that we've landed this about right.
Do you have a total dollar value of this package?
$240 million for the concessionary and equity aspect of it, well over $1 billion for the first part of it, but we can't give you an exact number on that until we know exactly how many banks are willing to take part, because actually they are a key stakeholder in this. We can't force them to do it. We want them to do it, and the conversations we've had have been incredibly promising. I expect you'll be hearing from the banks very shortly that they're taking part. But until we know exactly how many are, we can't put a final figure on that. But we're willing to back businesses that need it, and so when we know, we'll be able to confirm the number.
And just on the inquiry, Do you have any idea of how long that's going to take? I mean, I know here in Hawke's Bay the local inquiry isn't due to finish until December. We've already had heavy rain, as you mentioned earlier. That's starting to, need civil defence responses and that kind of thing. How long is this going to take, and then for something to be put into place so that we are safer when this happens again?
Well, you're right to point out that we need to make the changes as quick as possible. The cruel irony is that I was due to introduce the Emergency Management Bill the week that Gabrielle hit, and Parliament shut down and we didn't get to do it, and now we're only finally getting a chance to do it today. Because the question we had in our mind is, well, what do we do? We know that there's going to be some questions that come out of Gabrielle. Do we do 2 pieces of legislation, or do we try and time it right? So I've asked the government inquiry to report back by March. I've suggested, I can't tell the select committee what to do, but I've encouraged them to extend their process out to maybe April so that we can incorporate those lessons. It'll actually, if that works out how I hope, then everything will be in action much quicker than what it would have done otherwise. But some changes don't require legislative change. That's the other thing, is that local civil defence and NEMA are constantly reviewing things. What gave me reassurance is that being in Gisborne on Saturday, I talked to locals on the ground. They said local civil defence response to this event was far better than it was last time. They've picked up our feedback, they've improved, and that's really encouraging and certainly consistent with what I've seen of civil defence across the country.
We'll start to wrap up, guys. Any final questions?
Can we just have Cam and Nadine back to answer them?
As
they're
Emergency
comfortable.
Management Minister, would you expect a local civil defence team to stay on through the night monitoring things?
Well, we leave those operational decisions to local civil defence, but backed up by NEMA. So the bunker in Wellington was set up pretty quickly when Auckland floods were happening, and it was still operational when Gabrielle hit. So every civil defence, as it was coming about, was getting support and guidance from Wellington. But ultimately, that's their call. Like I said earlier, is that we're announcing this inquiry because we want to incorporate the lessons. We want to identify what went well, what could improve, and what didn't go well at all. I don't think it'll be helpful for me to start pointing the finger and throwing my reckons out there now that we've announced an inquiry to do that formally.
Would you two have preferred just getting a grant in cash rather than this scheme?
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion about what could happen and couldn't happen. The reality is packages have been developed that will allow and enable some commercial overlay to that situation, and to do that via a grant doesn't actually provide that, unfortunately.
Because you had as was mentioned, you had very specific requests, and they haven't really been met according to what you wanted. So are you disappointed in this?
I'm not disappointed in this. The reality is, when you actually go through everything, this has been a very complex thing, as the Minister said. In the perfect world, giving out grants would be the ideal thing, right? But the reality is, with doing that, there would have been no necessary commercial ability to overlay on that. Plus, there is some policies that exist, unfortunately, post the Manawatu floods that capped the amount that government would have been able to give as grants. And in the case of a business like Taylor Corp, that would have actually had little to no impact.
So they wouldn't have been big enough?
No.
Were you hoping for more from today's announcement?
It's hard to know, because in the reality at the moment we have to take some time to work through how these instruments will work for each business, because as we've heard this morning, every single individual grower we've got in this region and all of the other regions across the country through fruit and vegetable have very different circumstances. We as industry bodies, we don't get to understand or see that information, and neither should we. Therefore, we've had to try and develop and create instruments that would be able to be utilised by banks and other arrangements.
Are you confident this will help growers?
I think, to Cam's point, the biggest thing for today is the certainty of this is it. They've announced the package. Sitting waiting has been the hardest part, and that's, no reflection on anyone, particularly the reality. It's been very complicated. So the fact that today's the day and it's what it is will help growers make decisions, because that's been the hardest part.